Okay. All right. Well, hello and good morning, and thanks for joining me online and just being flexible. And, anyway, I have the wrong date. It's Wednesday, but today we're going to take a look at it's a little bit of a different lecture, and this is I'm going to just be kind of asking a bunch of questions, and these are things that you should think about and consider when doing some kind of data analysis. Okay. So there's a related reading from chapter 8 in our textbook. This is also a good page. It's on Wikipedia on the misuse of statistics, and it provides a bunch of examples of how statistics can be manipulated or misinterpreted, sometimes by malicious intent, sometimes because of incompetence. But but yeah, these are things we have to look out for. So actually, we'll just kind of briefly go over um, you know, many misuses of statistics occur because the source is a subject matter expert, not a statistics expert, and things like that. But anyway, frequent things that happen is discarding unfavorable observations, okay? Or, it says ignoring important features, loaded questions, overgeneralizations, biased samples, misreporting or misunderstanding of estimated error. There's all kinds of things. This is an important, I would say, an important article that on Wikipedia that provides a lot of kind of things that could go wrong in a statistical analysis. There's also another book or optional reading. There's a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, which I think is kind of a witty title by Kathy O'Neill. And then she also has a shorter essay that you can read online called On Being a Data Skeptic. And basically, the core premise of both of these articles, or the article in the book, is that algorithms can end up reinforcing inequality and harm individuals. So algorithms are helpful, when applied to big data for a lot of kind of speeding up decision making and things like that. But because it's just making decisions based off of past data and things like that, it could end up reinforcing um, problems or inequality or things that exist in the data. And so a lot of kind of interesting points and things to think about. All right. But anyway, just some ethical considerations, and I guess also just warnings, things to look out for is, when you make a data visualization, you want to do do a good job, and you don't want to mislead your viewers. The examples we'll see probably, well, I don't know about probably, but just sometimes feel like they are intentionally misleading, and that could certainly be the case. But sometimes you can end up having a misleading graphic by, um, unintentionally. So here is a plot, okay, and it says gun deaths in Florida, and it says, okay, here's in 2005. This was when Florida enacted your stand your ground law, and then the number changed, okay. And here's the weird thing is that they put zero on the top and 1,000 on the bottom. And so when you see a big change here, it looks like there was a big drop, but it actually corresponds to go from something below 600 deaths to over 700. Okay. Um, this jump here. And so that, kind of flips the normal convention. Normal convention is up corresponds to increasing values, and in this case, the the y-axis has been flipped upside down. And so um, that will kind of make a decrease look like an increase, and or an increase look like a decrease, and that's likely to kind of mislead your viewer. So I don't know if this was intentional or whatever, but certainly it seems to communicate the wrong thing. Okay. Here is um, a chart here regarding climate change, and it says average annual global temperature in Fahrenheit, and it looks like the line is flat. Okay. Um, this is like a 10-year-old tweet, but basically, the scale goes from 0 to 110, um, and um, and if you zoom in, okay, there's actually quite a steady rise, okay, in average annual global temperature. But again, on this scale, the slope is it seems like it's very kind of shallow, and it doesn't look like it's um, changing very much. But um, this is uh, you know kind of misleading here, I would say. Um, yeah, this plot, okay, it says this came from the COVID pandemic, and it says this shows the data for some of the most impacted counties, okay, and this data is all over the place, but I guess Hall County in April 19th had a lot, and then the Fulton County and Gwinnett and whatever, and these were the five most impacted counties. And what we see is the um, the amount of kind of confirmed COVID-19 cases for different dates. Okay, but here's the weird thing: um, it's not in chronological order. Here we have April 19th, and then April 17th, then April 22, then April 20th, then April 21st, then April 28th, April 24th, April 23rd, 27th, 18th, 29th, 25th, 26th, 30th. So the overall trend in this plot seems like there was a lot, and then it seems to decrease over time. But that's not really reflected in the data. Okay. Uh, when you have a time on the x-axis, the general convention is that we treat this like a number line, and as you move to the right, you're kind of moving forward in time. Um, and here they've decided they're going to just kind of move the dates around. Okay. Which you shouldn't do. Okay. Um, and so, the X doesn't display the data in chronological order. And so kind of the effect of that is you end up getting something that feels misleading, in that it feels like maybe what's trying to be conveyed is that the number of cases is decreasing over time. But that's not the case. Okay. It's just kind of I don't know what this is showing. It's just like all over the place. Okay. This is a bad data graphic. Um anyway, so these are just things that could go wrong when producing data graphics, and I guess things you should be on the lookout for when you're looking at a data graphic produced by someone else. And then also things that you should think about yourself. Ask yourself, is my data graphic likely to be misinterpreted? Okay. Let me go ahead and give you your first view quiz answer. So question one today is going to be the letter A. A as in apple is our first view quiz answer. Okay. This just comes with this broad title called Data Science Ethics, and uh, I don't really answer any questions. The topic of ethics is is difficult, and I don't know if I can just come in and say this is how you are going to ethically use your data, and this use is ethical and this use is unethical. Um, you know, a lot of what we decide regarding what is ethical or what is not ethical, depends on, our own kind of personal morals and values. But what I want you to be aware of is just to have some of these questions in mind. Um, and sometimes it's easier for us to just say, okay, well, we'll let the data speak for itself, um, and and then based on that, we'll go there. But allowing the data to speak for itself also assumes certain things, and so I just kind of want to bring them up and mention them here. Okay, um, there is the Hippocratic Oath, which is what doctors are supposed to adhere to, and it's kind of the idea of doing no harm to your patients, a doctor's patients. And there's a few principles from the Hippocratic Oath that we might want to adapt in the context of data science, and this is based largely on our textbook, Modern Data Science. And so, one of the things that is in the Hippocratic Oath is kind of the idea of not being ashamed to say you don't know something, and not be ashamed of asking for help. Okay. And similarly, if we adapt that to data, we can say, um, we're we're not going to be ashamed to say we don't know something. Okay. And we don't want to, and we're not going to be ashamed to kind of ask, uh, you know, a colleague or a peer, for help in solving a problem. Okay. Um, Another one is we'll respect the privacy of our patients, for their problems are not disclosed to me that the world may know. And similarly, when we talk about data, data privacy is kind of a big thing. Okay. So we want to think about, the data that we have. We want to treat it with security and privacy. Okay. And then, from the Hippocratic Oath that says, I will remember that I remain a member of society with special obligations to all my fellow human beings, those sound of mind and body, as well as the infirm. And here we're going to say, we'll remember that the data that we have often are not just numbers without meaning or context, but a lot of times they represent real people or real situations. And um, and our work can lead to consequences in society, some of them unintended. Okay. And it could lead to things like inequality, poverty, and disparities due to, this idea of algorithmic bias. Okay. Here is There's a website, datapractices.org, and it's just kind of um, this ideal of like how data should be used. This is kind of the ideal scenario. And um, already we know that a lot of times our data is misused. Okay. People are trying to make profits off of customers and whatnot, and that could end up leading to the misuse of data, right? So number one, ideally and again, this is an ideal. When you work for a company, um, they've hired you to do a job, and um, you'll have to kind of weigh what your obligations are to the company, which is, they hired you to do something specifically, but also your obligations to society, right? And it is possible that you end up in a place where, um, these things are in conflict, and then you have to make a decision about what you're going to do. Okay. And so anyway, um, ideally we would use our data to improve life for our users, not just improving profits. But again, that's kind of the ideal. Um, we want our work to be reproducible, so that others can verify our results and also build off of it if necessary. And yeah, build teams with diverse ideas, backgrounds, and strengths so you get more than one perspective. Um, Prioritize continuous collection to kind of update things. Okay. Clearly identify the questions and objectives that drive each project. Be open to changing our methods or conclusions in response to new knowledge or new data. Recognize any bias in ourselves, and kind of mitigate those biases, right, in ourselves and in the data. Okay. Ultimately, the data, when we produce something, ideally it can be made to make better informed decisions. We want to think about ethical implications of our choices when using the data and the impacts it could have on individuals and society. Allow for criticism of our work. Okay. And the identification of errors and risks and unintended consequences, protect the privacy and security of our individuals, and then help others to understand the most useful and appropriate applications of data to kind of solve these problems. Okay, so again, these are our guiding principles. This is the ideal scenario that we can follow to kind of have, I guess, an ethical use of our data and hopefully improve the world. And again, that's what we want. It's sometimes you're in a situation where maybe you can't adhere to all of these things. Okay. So here are just a few different situations or scenarios. I've taken these from the textbook, and for a lot of these, I'm just going to kind of pose questions regarding, like, what should you consider and what should you think about? Okay. So, in this scenario, a statistician or data scientist was asked to design a model, and they used some publicly available information. They fit a linear regression model. The model was fit to the data, and then after presenting the findings, the CEO wants to kind of tweak the model to their liking. Okay. And what does tweak mean there? But just basically, linear regression was fit, and the model estimated certain kind of slope and intercept parameters or whatever it might be. And the CEO says, okay, well, that's nice, but can we kind of change some of these numbers? Okay. So, the model was originally fit to the data using, I guess, methods generally accepted by the statistical community. And in effect, the CEO wants to do something different from kind of these generally accepted methods. Linear regression is kind of a well-known and well-documented method. And we haven't covered that specifically in our class yet, but basically, there's kind of a process. And if you follow the process, these are the values you're going to get. And they reflect certain things. And basically the CEO says, hey, yeah, I want to kind of tweak these. I want to kind of just like change this a little bit. So that's different from just kind of the normally accepted process. So, we think about how we want to kind of present our work, okay, to make better informed decisions. So, what do we communicate to our CEO about the implications of their, I guess, request? Okay. And so another principle is that we want to help others to understand the most useful and appropriate applications of data to solve the problem. And so, perhaps tweaking, might be what the CEO wants. He wants to kind of change the numbers, but then I guess the question is, why are we bothering to look at the data itself, right? We're basically just kind of drawing our own charts, rather than saying, okay, well, this is the chart that you get when we look at the data, but we just want to kind of make the chart look nicer to kind of fit what we are imagining or something like that. Okay. Um, some questions to consider. What are the consequences of following the CEO's request? Okay. And it just could be that, if you just do what the CEO asks, then you are going to mislead him into believing, the situation is better than it actually is, or something like that. And then, if you want to push back on this request, what are ways you can consider doing that? You know, Ideally, you don't want to you don't want to lose your job, but at the same time, you do have a responsibility, right? So, I don't know. These are things you have to kind of think about and weigh about, what would happen if you do one or the other, and um, I guess depending on the scenario, um, I don't know. I think as people, we have to kind of pick and choose our battles. I think trying, you might be right for a lot of things, but not everything has to be a hill that you die on, if that makes sense. Um, because if the fact of the matter is a lot of the world operates in a little bit of a gray area. Okay. It's nice if everything can be black and white, and it would be nice if we can always pick the the thing that is, feels morally and ethically correct, and not have any of these kind of um problematic situations. um but there might be scenarios where yeah, it might be okay to uh um I don't know. I don't want to say be unethical, okay? But yeah, not everything has to be a hill that you die on. And again, I'm not saying anybody should kind of compromise their morals or their ethics. Um, but yeah, I guess you have to think about what are the uh potential consequences of everything, and weigh that, and consider that. Okay. Um, all right, here is another scenario listed in the textbook. And it was the U.S. Office of Federal Contract Compliance uses a method to identify discrimination. Okay. And so basically, it's trying to, it says basically if you're going to have a contract with the federal government, so, the federal government says, we'll hire your company, and we'll give your company this much money to do this project for us. But you have to kind of follow these rules. And one of the rules is that when you, as a company, when you hire people, you're not allowed to discriminate based on, these different criteria. Okay. And so if you want to have a contract with the federal government, you're not allowed to discriminate. And so there is, to kind of check to make sure everybody's in compliance with their federal contract and things like that, they try to identify, is there any discrimination taking place? Okay. But the method being used could end up yielding false positives. So a company that doesn't discriminate could end up being accused of discrimination. Okay. So um, what does that mean, and what are the consequences of that? Okay. So um, we a principle that could help would be you know allowing for criticism of our work, okay, while promoting the identification and open discussion of different kinds of problems, errors, risks, and unintended consequences, okay. And so the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, the OFCCP, might argue they're not a statistical organization and they are trying to enforce a law of no discrimination, not participating in research. Okay. But that could end up uh, leading them to facing a lawsuit by a company that feels like they're being unfairly labeled as being discriminatory. Okay. And I'm not quite sure how the method used to um, determine if a company is um, being discriminatory or not. But yeah, is it possible that based on the kind of like our hiring data, it appears that they haven't hired enough of a certain demographic group, or they're hiring too many of a certain demographic group, that it could look that way. And we have the challenge of trying to prove or disprove discrimination. Sorry, one second. And so, there are different kind of hurdles, okay, especially in a legal context, right? Trying to prove something in a court of law is very different from just saying this is statistically significant. Okay, and so we have statistical methods, and in short, all of our statistical methods can say, hey, here is an interesting relationship. This seems like an interesting relationship that exists. We're finding an interesting kind of pattern. This pattern is unlikely to be the result of just pure randomness. Okay. But it's as statisticians, we very much hesitate to use the word, the data prove something. Okay. And so, when we think about um, how to present things in the legal context, that's going to be different. Okay. And, obviously, the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs wants to identify discrimination. We want to avoid false positives. And at the same time, we also want to avoid false negatives. Okay. And so, this is just a challenge. Okay. We don't want to unjustly accuse a company of discriminating if it doesn't. Okay. But if a company is discriminating, we do want to catch them. And so, we have this kind of, um, you have two sides of the coin, and they're difficult. How do you find a balance, right? And so, um, uh, these are kind of difficult, difficult questions. The ethical implication of a false positive is you're accusing a company of discriminating when in reality they are not. And so that could be, the company ends up losing a contract. People can end up losing jobs. Okay. A false negative means a company is discriminating and they're getting away with it. You haven't identified them. Okay. Both of these things are bad. You have to ask which of these is worse. And if we had to pick a side, right? If there's a company that shows up in your thing and you have to kind of decide, do we want to go forward with the accusation or not? What is, which side are you going to err on, right? So these are things you have to kind of think about and be concerned about. Okay. Let me go ahead and give you your second view quiz answer. Question 2 is the answer E. E as an elephant. Okay. Um, this one, this is this is listed in the textbook, and again, it seems kind of uh yeah, it's kind of it seems a little bizarre, but the researchers were wondering if it was possible to look at a person's face, okay, and try to predict a person's sexual orientation based on their face, okay. And they didn't call it gaydar, but it's kind of the idea of, can you identify someone's sexual orientation based on, outward appearance or um, things like that, okay. And you might have some you might have data on people's sexual orientation. You might have images to run through to kind of train your network. But this question is this even ethical to do in the first place? Okay. And it's not that these researchers are necessarily homophobic or anything like that, and they're trying to um, figure this out. But they could have started with like a genuine um, scientific question of, is there a relationship between, sexual orientation and someone's appearance, or, based on their face and things like that. Okay. Um, Despite this, even if you do have a legitimate research and scientific question, what what are the consequences, right? And what are the ethical implications of performing such research? Okay. So, what are the ethical implications of choices we make when using data? And, what impacts would our work have on individuals and society? And, the matter of someone's sexual orientation is a private topic. Okay. And so we want to be able to protect someone's privacy. Okay. And, the of the individuals represented in our data. And so even in your training data, somebody might have shared with the kind of the data collection their sexual orientation. This is still something that is a private matter, and is not necessarily something that they would want shared with the world. It and again, how private somebody is about their sexual orientation is going to differ from one individual to another. And so while some people might be okay and they might be out and they're open about their sexual orientation, others may not be. And so we have to kind of respect everyone's kind of personal preference there. Okay. And so one question is it even ethical? Is it ethical even to attempt this, right? Um, and if somebody were to um, attempt such a thing, what are the potential harms, right? Um, you know, you might live in a society that, or a certain area where, um, you know, people of different sexual orientations are welcome and embraced. But the truth is that different parts of the world um, are not so open, and different parts of the world it is still illegal to have a sexual orientation that is not heterosexual. Um, People could face discrimination, um, and even kind of so on the harmful end, you could end up placing somebody in danger. Okay, if their sexual orientation is revealed in a place where it's dangerous to have a certain sexual orientation. At best, you might just be perpetuating certain stereotypes about what the physical appearance you know um of different orientations. And so what are some of these kind of privacy implications? And is you might have a whole bunch of data or whatever, and there could be some kind of interesting finding, but is that even valid, or is it based on flawed assumptions and things like that? And so there might be a genuine scientific question and interest, but then that research could end up also producing societal harm. So these are things you have to weigh and consider. Um, and yeah, certain questions may not be able to be answered in an ethical manner. Okay. Um, all kinds of other scenarios are mentioned in the book, and they all kind of come with their own messy ethical considerations, right? Can you predict someone's race or ethnicity based on someone's last name? And the answer is yeah, there's certainly going to be trends in it, and I think we uh, you know this, right? Like my last name is Chen, and from hearing that, you can probably assume that I have Asian ancestry even before you even see my physical appearance. Um, and and uh, and yeah, there are certain last names that are associated with certain nationalities and ethnicities and things like that. Um, and you might be able to produce a data set and an algorithm that is able to do to perform that. And if you use it just kind of in an innocent manner, and you're just like, oh, I'm just kind of curious about that. That's one thing, but there's also the question of can that be eventually misused, right? If you develop a certain technology, it can be nice, but then also can it be misused? Now, just because something can be misused doesn't mean you shouldn't ever do it. But these are things you have to think about. Are there kind of safeguards you can kind of put in place and things like that? And these are basically different kind of scenarios and things. There's in drug approvals, sometimes a drug gets approved, but then depending on what happens, maybe the drug approval gets withdrawn later, and you have a responsibility to identify certain risks and inform the decision makers about these things. Okay. um you know you might work for a tech company or social media company or something, and a lot of these things, right, like a casino is designed to keep the people playing casinos games and things like that for as long as possible, right? And they're kind of designed to be quote addictive as possible, so that people spend more time on the app, more time on the site, more time doing whatever. And certainly that aligns with the company's motives of earning profits. um is that going to be, you know, I guess you have to ask yourself, do you want to be a part of that? Are you okay with that? And there's kind of this, well, if you're not going to do it, maybe someone else will. But does that mean it's okay to still do it? Is the ethical decision to not participate? And it's kind of the answer is it's difficult, and I don't know if there's a right answer for all of this. There's kind of a very humorous um, TV series. It's a few years old now. It called Silicon Valley, and it the kind of the main driving premise is the main character is this CEO of this tech startup, and he has all of these kind of moral and ethical dilemmas. And the main character kind of always wants to do the right thing. He doesn't always make the right choice. Sometimes he messes up and he chooses the wrong the wrong choice or the selfish decision or things like that. He makes decisions out of fear. But ultimately, in a lot of scenarios, he wants to make the right choice, but it's it's difficult, and he's called a hypocrite many times. And I think a lot of times viewers they're not quite sure if they like or dislike this main character, just because of all of the flaws he faces or he has, right? And so this is the human reality. Is it's difficult to be 100% ethical every single time, but I believe we should still do our best, and we do have a responsibility to society. Okay. Um, yeah, data science shows that on a lot of sites, content that is inflammatory often results in the most engagement. Okay, more views, more comments, more shares. Um, and so, the algorithms may end up promoting this inflammatory content over other content, just because it's trying to promote um, engagement. But is that a net benefit to society? Okay. And we are constantly, as data scientists, running into this issue of algorithmic bias. Okay. Algorithmic bias is the idea of this systematic and unfair discrimination or bias by a computational system, by an algorithm. Okay. The bias doesn't necessarily originate from the algorithm itself. Okay. The algorithm itself is just kind of taking data in and following it and saying, all right, these are the conclusions. But the bias comes from the biases that exist in the data, the training data that was fed into the system. Okay. And so if in history there was discrimination, let's say you are feeding in data from like police arrest records and things like that. Okay. Well, historically, there was discrimination, and certain groups of people were more likely to be arrested, and other groups were more likely to be kind of let off the hook. And so that uh, that discrimination, that history exists in the data. Okay. And if you just kind of feed that in naively into the the algorithms and the computational systems, that kind of bias could end up being perpetuated, right? So algorithmic bias could end up could perpetuate existing inequalities, deny opportunities, lead to unfair treatment. Okay. Other sources of bias could be, how it was measured, how it was sampled, how the users interacted with the data. Certain users might be more or less likely to kind of interact or respond. And, certainly within the design choices of the algorithm itself, there could be, some biases present. Okay. So how do you kind of fix this? And that's a tough question, right? So one thing is you want to kind of check the data itself and ask yourself if there biases exist in the data. Is there any kind of way to measure fairness? Adversarial training is the idea of like if you intentionally put in bad data, adversarial data, like someone is trying to mess up your algorithms and things like that. Does your system kind of is your system resistant to that? Okay. Um, you can kind of just manually put in certain guides and guardrails, right? So chat gpt, if you ask certain questions, it'll say, I'm sorry, I can't answer that, right? And those were kind of manually put in um, by OpenAI, who said, you know what, this is naively, if we just asked any kind of question and it takes all the data, it might be able to produce a response. But we want to make sure we're not going to promote certain violent content or something like that. And so they try to manually put in safeguards, and there's kind of this this game of like, can we jailbreak? Can we figure a way around some of these things? Okay. Before the days of ChatGPT, Microsoft had created an AI chatbot, and it was intended to try to learn from what people were saying, and it would update its the way it's things. And when people discovered this, there were a bunch of kind of like trolls online, and they fed it a whole bunch of inflammatory and offensive information. And then the chatbot ended up starting to repeat some of these phrases, and Microsoft had to shut down the whole system. Okay. And so the idea of like adversarial training is that, yeah, there might be cases where people are acting as adversaries, trying to hijack and trying to dirty the flow of data entering the system, and then manipulating the output there. Okay. Um, there, other kinds of things that seem a little bit more innocent, but could end up, um, perpetuating inequalities is, what if you were running a real estate website like Zillow or Redfin or something like that, and you wanted your algorithms to predict housing prices as accurately as possible? Okay. Well, one of the big factors in determining housing price is going to be the neighborhood that the house is located in. Okay. But there, historically in the United States, there were, racist policies. Okay. This, known as redlining, and basically, certain neighborhoods were, there were policies that basically made it illegal, or like that discouraged, certain races to enter certain neighborhoods. And so, even if these policies have been made illegal today, that kind of historical trends have kind of carried forward today, right? You still have certain neighborhoods that are predominantly one race or another. Okay. Some neighborhoods have very few minorities living in them. Other neighborhoods have high proportions of minorities. And, that could be, self-selection. People could end up choosing to live there by choice. Or it could be, the effects of history being carried forward. And so, these are things. And if you use all of that data in there and you create a price prediction system that's, say, continues to predict lower house prices for neighborhoods with a high proportion of minorities, is the website perpetuating and exacerbating wealth discrepancies, or is that just what the data shows? And I think this could be argued either way, and these are things to think about and consider. Okay. Similar things for policing data, and then, yeah, these kinds of things still still happen. And depending on which nation and things like that, in China, there are certain provinces in China that have ethnic minorities. And in China, they're using AI systems to kind of racially profile. And these are, yeah, things that, we have to kind of consider and worry about. And perhaps we aren't able to stop all of it, but we do have a role and responsibility in what we choose to participate in. So I guess, again, I'm not answering any questions here, but just challenging you to ask these questions. Okay, let me go ahead and give you your last view quiz answer. Last view quiz answer today is the letter A. And we'll wrap things up here. And have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on Friday.